Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. I wanted to talk about procrastination and Saturn. And I think all of us at some point, it doesn't matter how successful you are or how adept you are at your job, your goals. I think all of us have dealt with a situation before where we procrastinated. And sometimes we procrastinate for different reasons. We may procrastinate because we just don't want to do it. We can procrastinate because we doubt the skills to do it. We can procrastinate because we think that something is not, the best way to do it. We may procrastinate because we feel like something better can be done. Like there's so many different reasons why. Some people work best under pressure, and some people say I will wait until the deadline to get it done, right before the deadline. But I wanted to really examine this because it's so many people who are like, I want to do this thing, or I'm supposed to do this, but I just can't get it done. And your Saturn placement has a part in this, okay? Your Saturn placement can help you understand, I want to do this differently. Instead of talking about we're going to talk about where you might procrastinate, and we might talk about when you might procrastinate. We might talk about what might get you up and moving. I also want to say, we know that Saturn is the planet that deals with limitation, restriction, delays. Success, though, ambition. It deals with things that can be considered to be, disciplinary actions, authority, right? So Saturn is the stuff we don't want to do. But you might have a different relationship with Saturn depending on what's happening in your chart. So for example, if Saturn is your chart ruler, or Saturn rules over your sun, your moon, you may have a different experience. If you have a diurnal chart, Saturn is not going to be as malefic to you as Mars will be. So you do have to look at what is your relationship with Saturn, or what house is it in? Is it conjuncting any planets? Like what's happening with your Saturn? So I want to go through the signs of just the procrastination styles, why you might procrastinate, or what you might take seriously. Saturn in Aries. A Saturn in Aries person may sometimes learn to do what is required only after they've had a situation where they have to do something themselves. When nobody else is there to pat you on the back, nobody else is there to say, go do it. That is the moment where you may see that maturity. But also people with Saturn and Aries may they might eventually act or not procrastinate once something they want is at stake. So when something that Saturn Aries person wants for themselves, when they're now impacted, they might say, okay, I'm going to get up and challenge. I'm going to do what I need to do. And that's also because, for example, if you work somewhere and let's say like there's a project, but that person feels a personal connection to that project, right? Oh, we got to get that done. That's my cousin-in-law's company. And right? It is when you'll see people like all of a sudden start to be really, really motivated. It can sometimes be Saturn and Aries because it's about a self-interest. And now you're ready to put in the effort. Now you're ready to put in the energy and the hard work because it now impacts something you want or impacts something you find as personal. Aries energy, personal. Keep in mind, Aries, personal. What I want. Doesn't always have to be something bad, but that's what we're dealing with when you're dealing with Aries energy, right? So your Saturn and Aries people, that is what you'll typically get. You'll get one or the other. You'll be really active about things that directly impact you. A person like, wow, in their own life, they show up. They have so much courage. They have so much, focus and intensity to get the job done. But sometimes they can fall short with other people, especially if this person maybe has Saturn and Aries, but they have it opposing any Libra energy in their chart. So you could see those things happen. Saturn and Taurus. Now, Saturn and Taurus is a sign in which people like to see what it is that they're going to get from the situation. Saturn and Taurus people don't like to commit to anything before they know what am I going to gain from that? So they're not necessarily, if a sign something, going to jump onto it, let me get that done right away. It is a slow approach to wait, what is this building up to? They have to know what they're going to get out of it. They have to know what will they receive by the end of what you want them to do. Okay. And so someone, and so the slow process could also be the more they do something, the more they feel like, okay, this is achievable. If you talk about even when you're a kid or you're in college or you're in high school, wherever you're in school, maybe you're still in school now, maybe you're in graduate school, I don't know. And you're like working on a project or you're working on something you have to turn in, you might not be motivated at first. But the more you do, the more you build onto it, then you're going to start to feel more motivated because you can see at the end what you're trying to get, what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So Saturn and Taurus people don't procrastinate as much when they know what they're going to get. But when you give a Saturn Taurus person something and they don't feel it's a value, or you give them something and they're not seeing like what is it? Why does this matter? What does this matter? Like, why are we doing this? Right? Saturn and Taurus third house person could be like that, especially like, you know, if we're talking about like academia or learning or something like that. Like, why are we doing this? Like, what am I getting from this? Like, what tangible result will this produce? So if they're not really into it, if they don't see what it's going to be, sometimes Saturn and Taurus can procrastinate in certain situations. Saturn and Gemini gets a spark from new insights, new information. And so sometimes Saturn and Gemini might find something is not interesting. It's not important enough for me to entertain this. So that's why I'm not doing this. Or, hey, I got this notice in the mail. Or like someone keeps telling you, so you know how you get a notice in the mail and they keep saying you need to do this, you need to do that. And you're like, oh, nah. But then you get a notice in the mail that says, Saturn, Gemini people, final warning, final notice. They're going to notice things that are, because remember, Saturn does deal with discipline. Saturn does deal with harsh news, harsh things. And so Saturn and Gemini people, they learn from things that are serious. They learn from things that seem like they are, there's like a finality to it. There is a, you have to do this. But with Saturn and Gemini, it is going to be through words. It's going to be the way in which you communicate. It's like someone calling them on the phone like, hey, you got 3 weeks to get this done. Right? Like 3 weeks, the deadline was already passed. Hey, you have this time. So Saturn and Gemini, though it can be an energy that I probably talked about before, where there could be like this concentration on what they like to learn, the concentration on what is interesting. Like once they find something interesting, they can be really good and be like the masters of understanding something mentally. But with Saturn and Gemini, you also understand we're dealing with Saturn. So Saturn and Gemini, it's like information that is serious. They might respect people more in authority who give them certain types of information or certain types of things. You could give them all the advice you want, right? But once they get that notice in the mail, or they get that phone call, or they get that, like, write that email or something like, hey, this is now your 3rd time, such and such, then they will stop procrastinating because they realize what's at stake and they pay attention a lot to the way something is worded, the way something is addressed to them. Now, Saturn in Cancer. Okay, so Saturn in Cancer will learn to not procrastinate when something that they care about is now impacted, because Saturn is responsibility. So it can be this person, you know, maybe someone had a, you know, wasn't really living their life the way they should have, or they were really like irresponsible. And then all of a sudden now they have a child on the way, or they have, you know, they have a child. Now they realize, oh shoot, I need to grow up. So Saturn in Cancer procrastinates on things until they realize someone or something that they actually care about is now impacted by their lack of their lack of responsibility. So Saturn in Cancer, when they feel like something is their responsibility and it impacts someone else that they are responsible for, then you might likely see there be less procrastination. They'll move forward a little bit more. But in general, when Saturn in Cancer does not see the link, they don't see like, I'm not responsible for that. That's not my problem, right? Or that's not something I'm supposed to do, because Cancer energy cares about nurturing what it feels it cares about. So unless Saturn and Cancer feels that connection, a lot of times you're not going to see them, attribute that to other things in their life that they have to do. Saturn and Leo. Saturn and Leo procrastinates until they see something that they feel is something that they can do, that is taps into their sense of creativity. If they have creative direction over something, or they have a greater sense of understanding how they can apply their own skills to it, they're going to tend to do it. If you're telling a Saturn and Leo person to do something that doesn't really seem like it's interesting, it seems like something that is mundane. You're telling a Saturn and Leo person to do something that is they don't have any creative control. It's like, do this thing now, or I want you to work this. They're probably going to procrastinate on things that don't feel exciting. Oh, plan a party for your grandmother's 90th birthday party. Saturn Leo person with some other Leo placements. Oh yeah, they're going to be all over that, right? They're going to be all over like it, because it takes the Saturn a sense of responsibility to do something. Or you appeal to their ego. You're the oldest, and because you're the oldest, you have, you're the oldest, you really understand things, we really need your help because you're good at this and you're so successful. Like, appeal to the ego, right? The Saturn Leo person is more likely to take responsibility. But when you are telling a Saturn Leo person, you're trying to subjugate them or tell them they have to do something, or there's no pathway for them to show their touch. Leo energy is about like their touch, putting their personal touch on it, their own pizzazz, their own sense of like, I stamped this, I did this. And so I'm not saying that's necessary in all situations, but I am saying we're talking about procrastination. Sometimes that's why Saturn Leo doesn't want to do something. It is because they aren't able to fully show the range of who they are. They're not able to personalize it. Leo energy likes to personalize experience. And so when Saturn Leo feels like they can't personalize something, they're going to procrastinate. They're going to wait. Now, that doesn't mean Leo energy doesn't like to still shine and do things well. And I'm not saying that they can't do it. I'm saying if you see a person procrastinating and they have this placement, that is likely why. Now, once you help them understand, like, hey, you got a little creative control. Hey, if you want, you can change this slide around. Hey, can you actually be in charge of this? That is how you will get them to not procrastinate, right? Get them to have fun while they're doing something they don't really want to do. Saturn and Virgo. Saturn and Virgo sense of responsibility is very extremely strong. But Saturn and Virgo will sometimes procrastinate on things when they don't necessarily know how it's going to come out in the end. So sometimes Saturn and Virgo, if they are unsure of something, if something feels like it doesn't have the neat answer they're used to, I don't think Saturn and Virgo they're not really procrastinators, because there's this sense of duty and obligation through Saturn, but Virgo is this service, like I have to do this, I have to check this off my list energy. So Saturn and Virgo doesn't like to procrastinate, but you'll notice that when they do, it is usually because they have hit a roadblock and they're not quite sure of the answer. And so when they're not quite sure of the answer, sometimes they can drag things out past its time trying to figure out the right way to do something. But sometimes you can't figure out the right way to do something if something is urgent. It needs to be done now. It needs to be done in a hurry. It is important. But Saturn and Virgo doesn't like to stall on important things, but they might negate other things. Like there might be other, like they might pay a certain bill on time, but they might have to make a decision about their work, or they might have to make a decision where, they have to make a decision where it's not a clean, nice answer, but they'll stall and drag it out until they're kind of forced to make a decision. They'll kind of wait until they finally know what the end result is, but sometimes the end is too late. So that's important for Saturn and Virgo to keep in mind as lessons. Now, Saturn in Libra. Saturn in Libra. Saturn and Libra will procrastinate when they aren't really quite sure which one has the power. Here's where it's really interesting with Saturn and Libra. Saturn and Libra is not Sun and Libra. Now, you do have people who have Saturn and Libra. They also have Sun and Libra or Venus and Libra or whatever. Saturn and Libra will procrastinate when they're trying to weigh the odds of what has power, which situation is actually going to help me sustain what I need to be successful in the end. So sometimes you can see that in like who a kid is going to listen to. Saturn Libra child sometimes, okay? Who they're going to listen to, who has more power, who is the person that has more of the autonomy. So sometimes even in groups around friends. So Saturn and Libra can procrastinate when they're trying to figure out which side is to their advantage to follow through. Where's the consequence? If I do this with this person, then this is going to happen. If I don't listen to this person, this is going to happen. And as an adult, you sometimes see that in Saturn and Libra you can see it in the workplace. Someone trying to figure out who to align themselves with. Oh, they don't get along and they don't get along, but this person got more power, right? Right. And I don't want to say it's always about power. Sometimes it could just be about, which decision is going to be better for me in the long run, which is going to be the best thing that I should do. But Saturn requires us to think about things more so long term. So you can see a Saturn Libra person make a decision and you don't understand why they made that decision. Why didn't they just do this? But it's because they're able to think of where's the advantage, where's the power structure, and where do I fit in? My decision making has something to do with this. So if Saturn and Libra is procrastinating, just because they're trying to figure out which side actually has the most authority or the most control, so that way they can align themselves with what might be in their best interest. And that might not always be a bad thing, by the way, to think like that. Okay. All right. Saturn and Scorpio. Saturn and Scorpio may procrastinate unless they know something intricately. If Saturn and Scorpio has internalized something where it's a part of their core being, they will tend to do it. They'll tend to do it. They'll tend to know how to do it. But when Saturn and Scorpio is faced with something that they feel is not important, or something that they feel is against what they have internalized to be true, sometimes they can decide, I'm not going to go along with that. I'm not going to do that. Saturn and Scorpio energy because it concentrates itself. It's able to deal with things that are difficult. But when something seems too easy, sometimes they think there's a catch. So with Saturn and Scorpio, sometimes there's a little skepticism there. It's this, I don't really trust that. I'm going to go with what I know. And sometimes they won't procrastinate, but they're going to do something the same way they know how to do it, even when there's an easier way to do it. Saturn Scorpio is afraid to do things the easier way. And I'll talk about that through the South Node, North Node, Taurus, Scorpio, all that energy that can sometimes come with that. But so Saturn and Scorpio can procrastinate on doing things the way that could be simpler, in this effort to attach to what they know to be true internally. And I'm not saying that's bad. When you know something inside and out, like Saturn and Scorpio, it's actually beneficial to you. But sometimes you can, you feel very, anything that seems too transparent, you can be paranoid about, or skeptical about, but it can mean that you're always complicating your life. So just keep that in mind, okay? Saturn and Sag doesn't like things that aren't, like, they feel like they want to apply their efforts to things that appear like they can be more worthwhile experiences and situations. They don't like to apply themselves to things that aren't really interesting. So Saturn and Sagittarius can sometimes stop and procrastinate on things that don't feel aligned with what they want, what journey they're on. It could be a person, they started college and they stop. Nope, it's not for me. You're like, but wait, you're so smart, right? Going to college makes you smart, right? There's people who haven't gone there, they're smart. There's people who are in college and you ever wonder like what's going on there. But the point that I'm trying to make is like, that's an example. A person where like, you know that they can do it, but they don't want to do it. Saturn and Sagittarius is, I need to be serious about the journey that I'm on. And I can abandon at any time if it's not really a part of what I really want to do and what I really believe. So for Saturn and Sagittarius, there can be procrastination of anything that doesn't feel like it's a part of their journey. It can feel like something that is misaligned. And so sometimes you can get frustrated, like, well, why don't you just do this thing I'm telling you to do? But Sag energy is about this kind of personal pursuit of truth. Saturn and Sag means they can be quite serious about their journey, but it also can mean that if there's anything that they feel is, too mundane, too boring, too status quo, sometimes they will defer and say, no, I'm not actually going to follow through with that. Or it can be, it's not interesting enough to me. Let me make it interesting. If you're working on something and you're like, no, I don't really like this, it sometimes can be they need to feel mentally stimulated. So they get bored easily. So Saturn and Sagittarius often needs to feel stimulated, much like Gemini. But with Sag, it's like, I need to feel stimulated in the sense that this is giving me a new experience. And so it is about the new experience. Saturn and Sagittarius, it is about the experience. It is about how you are introducing something. It is about how something feels aligned. If it feels like something they're being told to do that has no meaning, you could definitely see them say, well, I'm not doing this. This makes no sense. Much like Saturn and Pisces. I'll talk about that in a second. Saturn and Capricorn it doesn't procrastinate on anything big. Saturn and Capricorn can procrastinate on anything that they don't. Sometimes that isn't really a part of the goal. If it feels like something they don't think something is actually capable of being successful. So it's not even a procrastination for them, because Saturn and Capricorn takes responsibility. Very important, if any sign. Maybe Saturn in Virgo is after them. But with Saturn and Capricorn, if they're saying they're not doing something, they don't think it's going to be successful. So you kind of sometimes want to watch their lead and how they're doing something, because if Saturn and Capricorn is about responsibility and doing what needs to be done, but if they don't think something is worth doing, if they're like, that's a waste of time, that's not going to work, that's when sometimes you might see a Saturn Capricorn person procrastinate. And they might not do it until they see at the end, like, okay, I have to do this. Like if someone is saying, hey, you have to do, like a parent's telling the kids, you got to do this. The Saturn Capricorn kid might be like, no, I'm not doing that, because what's the point? Like, I'm not doing it. And then once they gets closer to time, like, oh shoot, my siblings are doing this, I guess I should. Or if somebody's at work and it's like, I don't think that project's going to make any sense. Like, I don't know why we're doing that. Like, that's not a good idea. But then you have to do it. And at the end you do it, but you still know like that long term does not make sense. Like, that's not a good way to do it. That's not the appropriate way to do it. Saturn and Capricorn can sometimes have that mindset. Like, that's not the appropriate way to do it. Okay. It's not like Virgo, where Virgo will be like, actually, if we improve this, maybe we can do it. Like, it's mutable. It's mutable energy. Capricorn is like, no, that's not going to work. And so there can sometimes be that tug and that pull, like a factor when like they don't feel convinced that something's a good idea, but they have to push through it anyway. So that's when you, probably one of the few times you'll see a procrastination from a Saturn and Capricorn person. Pay attention, because they don't think it's something that'll last. They don't think it's something that can take long, right? Because things that they think can be successful, they pour their energy into. Saturn and Aquarius. Saturn and Aquarius will procrastinate where they feel like something is not going to be evolved enough of an idea. Saturn and Aquarius can procrastinate when something seems like it is just following the status quo. Saturn and Aquarius, if they think that something could be done better, they're going to wait a little bit. And that's where you'll see a little tiny bit of similarity between them and Capricorn, because remember, they're both ruled traditionally by Saturn, whereas the modern ruler of Aquarius is also Uranus. But when you see Saturn and Aquarius, they want to collectively understand things first. Hey, did we get a consensus here? Hey, what do you think about that? Like, they kind of want to see what other people think. Has this been tested out before they commit to doing something? Because if they think there's a better way to do it, they can kind of pick up where Saturn and Capricorn's like, nah, that doesn't make sense. Saturn and Aquarius is, I think there's a different way to do it. And so when they procrastinate, they're thinking, they're experimenting, they're getting a consensus from people to see like, hey, are we all really going to do this? Or I don't know if this is a good idea. Like, let me see if there's another way to do it. And sometimes when they don't want to do something, they're going to try to find an alternate way too. Saturn and Pisces energy. So if Saturn is about our responsibility, it is about the way in which we deal with things that are difficult. Saturn and Pisces will procrastinate. The way in which someone may procrastinate with this energy is, I don't want to do that, right? Like, I don't want to do that. Pisces, and some people can be so into their Pisces energy that they don't realize sometimes we have to do things we don't want to do, right? And so Pisces, Saturn, Pisces can sometimes be very obstinate and like, I don't want to do that. Like, I'm not doing it. Or I don't see the point. That's not meaningful to me. That doesn't help me. Sometimes Pisces energy kind of wants to skip. It's like Sag, the mutables, right? But still, Sag and Gemini, you want to skip over things. They want to skip the process so they can get to the vision of what they want it to be. But I want it to be like this. But sometimes you have to do the small things that seem like silly. The small things like, this is not meaningful. This is not important. Why are we doing this? So Saturn Pisces will sometimes procrastinate this placement if something feels meaningless, if something feels like it is not really envisioning something that can be really, monumental, or something that can be, improving the way in which something can be seen or experienced. Saturn Pisces can sometimes be procrastinating on stuff that they think is like, that's not important. I don't really care about that. Like, okay, Saturn Pisces, I'm going to this event because it's meaningful to me. I'm going on a retreat. It's going to help me with my goals. Saturn and Pisces. Yeah, I got to get my car inspected, but yeah, that was supposed to happen a month ago, but right? Like, it's things that are mundane to Pisces energy in general. They don't really care as much about. It is more about feeling connected to things. Remember, Pisces is not an energy that deals with time very well. So that deadline means nothing. That deadline means nothing. Sending them that notice in the mail means nothing. I said Saturn, Gemini, you might get some fire under them. Saturn, Pisces doesn't. Sometimes there's that reality check that I've talked about before during the Saturn and Pisces transit in general. But sometimes you will have that reality check where Saturn and Pisces will finally do things once they realize they're not going to meet the thing that they really want. They're not going to get to the end of what they want unless they get into the nitty gritty of things. And Pisces energy does not like getting to the nitty gritty. But Saturn and Pisces can learn to view things from a lens of reality and how to get to where they want to get to by being responsible for the things that they don't want to do. So that way they have time to mature and time to see the results enough so that they can dive into the things that they want to do.